All right, welcome back to the show. And today I'm going to do something a little odd, different for myself. And like a lot of things on this show, I use the show to force myself to kind of stay honest and toe the line with the training that I've put upon myself. And something I've had historically difficulty doing is, after doing the proper analysis of a game, which is hard enough in itself, it is then often hard for me to put it into the computer. So I am going to force myself to do that on air just so I'd be really honest about the conclusions that I came to. A lot of times I feel like I just can dismiss the computer's analysis, or, I do all kinds of funny games with myself. So putting myself on camera and a way to force myself to be just really clear and articulate about what the machine tells me, which I'm sure at various points is going to be different than the analysis I've done. This is the last over the board game that I played, so I'm not going to have any other games. I could go back potentially, but this kind of caps a phase of both this show and my training where I felt like I did a really good job in analyzing this game, and I'm sure I could even do more. I did 30 plus pages of handwritten analysis, and it's really when I do that kind of analysis that I earnestly feel like I'm getting better as a player, and also chess is getting more interesting. I feel like a lot of ideas are opening up and ways of thinking about the game, and just the sharpness of positional ideas combined with tactics. And a lot of times, if I read books, it's just going to be positional ideas a lot of the times, and if I do tactics, it's just tactical ideas. But the beauty of going over your own games, right, is you're melding those two, and you have a personal relationship to the moves because you played them. And you had an experience of the moves, of course, under kind of a stressful environment. Okay, before I start, I just want to say I don't know yet. I'm gonna have to maybe even journal about it or something tomorrow. How I'm gonna go forward. I kind of like to read some books and do some opening study, but I don't yet have a structure for that. And honestly, it's one of the problems that everyone's facing now is we don't have games to play to actually go over. I feel hopeful that we're going to play some kind of tournament soon. It's not going to be very soon, and it's not going to be some big open. But maybe we can get the chess club in St. Louis to invite me for an invitational. Okay, so let's get into it. And what I did here that's a little bit different for myself is I normally when I do the analysis, I use Stockfish on my ChessBase engine. I recently saw a video with Danny Wrench, who's the chess.com chief dude, and he was giving advice on how to use the engine, and well, I thought I'd give it a try. So I'm using the Stockfish on chess.com, and we'll just see. So I said I should also announce the idea of this show is very simple. I'm not going to go through the entire game. I just want to let the computer run on a couple key points to see what it thinks. And these are the questions that I've kind of built up in my head over the last weeks it's been since I've been analyzing this game. And so I'm just going to do those specific instances. Okay, so the first thing, let's just run through the moves so people can see it. It's funny, this chess.com is showing me that little sign means it's a book move. And g3 was a strange move, and like I said before, that I saw that my opponent did this was what encouraged me to play the Philidor in the first place. So, bishop g2, and it's funny actually, the computer likes bishop g2. I felt that was an inaccuracy and that white should have played a4. Well, that's already an interesting question. So I thought a4, and white would have a small edge. And it thinks white has a small edge there, okay. Whereas after bishop g2, b5, I already felt I was equal. And here we're having an interesting debate too. So so here's the thing. All right. So white's next move, a3. Now, as you can see my a little bit of my annotations. This were annotations I did just without the computer today. I just input the whole thing. A really hard thing actually to do with this way I do it is to put in the times. Like I have to put in the times, like 142. And ChessBase and Chess.com are not great. This is my pro tip for either one of ChessBase or Chess.com. If you can build into your system a way that I can input the times that isn't janky. Like here, I'm just doing it like 142. If you had like a little clicker thing and it said input the time, that would be a lot more helpful. Okay. So this was the first move. I felt that white made a mistake. I thought, and interestingly here, okay, the computer is now with me. It's saying now I'm equal after b5 and a4, white was a little better. That was my sense. Now, I felt here that a3 was a poor move, after which I was completely equal, and then maybe even a little bit better, and castles was better for white, with the notion that maybe the plan would be, let's say bishop e7, and I think I called it knight h4. Right. And it's saying now all kinds of things. Maybe it's now it likes white a little bit. It could change its mind. Also, instead of bishop e7, I could play queen c7 first as well. But the main point I wanted to stress was that b4 was not a threat from black, because the knight on c3 is poor anyway, and I'm not going to be taking that pawn on e4 anytime soon. And with this plan, at least white has some ideas. And in the game, he doesn't really have any great ideas. So, good. Let's say I've confirmed the computer is affirming one suspicion of mine in any case. By the way, so I'm running this thing, and there's like I've run it at this depth, so it shows me its initial reading, and then after a while it gives me a minute of analysis, and now it's saying castles. By the way, I would be thinking of g6 there myself, but anyways, saying about equal with castles. All right, so we're going to say a3 was a mistake, and I didn't like rook e1. And here's my first question. Am I already a little touch better after rook e1? At least, let's give it a second. So I did play queen c7. Let's do that, queen c7. Also, I want to see what it thinks white should do. Right, I felt already that I was a little bit better. And the thing about rook e1 is you're a little bit, if you're going to play knight h4, there's no point in really playing rook e1. So it's a hard life for white, I think, to figure out what to do now. In fact, in the next couple moves, because the next couple moves are going to be easy for me to find a plan. I'm just going to play like bishop b7, rook e8, bishop f8. All that stuff is simple. And it likes white's first move. So let's say that with b3, rook e8 can't be wrong. Let's just put white's move on the board, bishop b2, and black's move. And now, again, white has to make a plan. And I think I got this one right, too. In my notes, anyway, I said knight b1 here was probably better than what he did, knight a2, which looks really weird. In fact, white's next two moves are kind of giving me a path toward being better. So, we're really beating this game to death. That's right, Josh. So Josh Fidel's joining me, GM Josh Fidel. By the way, he's got a great show on if you go to his Twitch channel, and he's got a YouTube page as well. Now, what I want to show you guys, actually, just something I did. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but here's a photo I took of just, I did a little graph of the evaluation, and, it goes up to like 0.5 or minus 0.5 and then beyond. And you can see there in the first 30 moves it goes back and forth a little bit. But that the trend toward black being better is, been the last couple moves. And the computer, I guess, mostly agrees with the situation. All right, so let's go back. And bishop b7, knight b1, and surprisingly, the computer still thinks white. It actually likes white a little bit better there. I do feel, though, that at least with knight b1, knight d2, you're introducing maybe c4, and the knight. It's very important, actually, that white needs to cover the e4 square, and that was part of my grief here. So I played knight a2. I'm just going to presume bishop f8 can't be wrong. And then knight c1 struck me as a mistake. And wow, well, me and Josh called this correctly. I had to think about this forever, by the way, in my post game, and Josh just found it like boom. Now, so I'll explain a little bit. This knight c1 looked really janky to me, and I think it's important. I identified like why I made the mistake I did. So I ended up playing c5. And I was obsessed with like tactically messing with the knight with threats of c4 and c3. And I completely misevaluated the position. And it's the first mistake of the game that I really feel, bad about. The computer rightly says ed4, knight d4, a6, and then clearly better. For me, if it's a pawn, that's a clearly better. Yeah, so we called that there. It wants ED and A6. That's right, man. It's kind of so. At least there's some affirmation of the analysis so far of what it likes. Now an interesting thing's going to happen. I definitely make a mistake on this move by playing C5, and the question becomes, do we like white or black after that? And I definitely felt in the game that I had committed a chess crime, and there was a part of my psychology which was very self-destructive, which felt like, I had sinned and now maybe I'm worse. Where Josh was saying, dude, you're not worse. It's just a weird Rui structure. Well, we'll see. At least get the computer's opinion on it. So far, we're crushing it. So far, we're fine with ED, knight d4, a6 being the right move. So c5, it gives it, this is hilarious, it gives it a question mark exclam, and I give it a question mark, just a plain question mark. And to me, I don't know, if you go from an evaluation of a pawn up to like equal, then I guess it's a question mark. But I've always been interested. People have different definitions of what the question mark exclam means. Dubious. Oh, there's all kinds of funky stuff. Anyways, terrible move. Absolutely terrible move. Like I said, I was obsessed with c4, and it doesn't really work. And one thing I want to stress is this is the beginning of 3 moves where I tanked. And I spent like 16 minutes on this move, and the next 2 moves I spend a lot. Right. Well, I think it would be fun if the chess world, well, I don't know. It would be nice for me anyway if the chess world came to a consensus of what question mark exclam means, and maybe chess.com isn't being helpful with this stuff. And when I say that, it's kind of weird because that kind of annotation is something from the last millennium, even before computers. And I don't think the kids use these annotations. They don't really annotate their games anyway. So here we go. D5 played instantly. I again thought forever because I realized the C4 business was not happening. It ended up liking C4 better, saying it's equal. Okay, now the next move, both me and Josh thought was a mistake. And then we're going to have an interesting question because Josh had a thing that I couldn't make work tactically, but we're going to look at it. So bishop c3, right, and the computer hates it, and it's already looking at Josh's line, which is really interesting. Now, it gives the question mark exclam. The thing about this move that I needed to appreciate in the game was that it was a weird move that did throw me for a loop, and it cost me a lot of time here again. because I was like, well, is he threatening bishop a5? Is that even something he wants to do? It wasn't immediately obvious to me. But let's just say the obvious things that's wrong about it. It's blocking the c pawn, and then the second thing, which wasn't obvious enough to me, was that the bishop is a tactical victim on c3. And one of the reasons I didn't consider Josh's variation, and Josh gets mad props because the computer likes it with knight takes e4, is because I felt I had sinned. Right. Now, you guys look at this. So Josh, his instinct with this was instant. Now, this, wasn't like something he analyzed very deeply. We're just on the show, and he said knight takes e4. Well, let's take a look, and I'll show you. I decided that it wasn't good in my own analysis, but we're going to see what we're thinking here. By the way, it thinks a5 is about the same, so we're going to find out. Knight e4, rook e4, knight d5, and I thought knight e2 here, so let's just see. It also thinks knight e2. And, all right, so I looked at all kinds of things here, and it's saying everything's good for black. Very interesting. Let's just go through its main variation. So knight f6, rook h4, and it's got d5 and all kinds of business. Wow. It just wants to calmly play h6, man. Yeah, this is really interesting. I did look at this. In fact, the movie he plays like g4. I kind of looked at it too, and maybe the most interesting thing about it is that I felt the counterplay was unclear, and like say g4 e4, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to open up the bishop on c3. By the way, this was totally just my analysis. During the game, I didn't consider knight takes e4 at all. This is a fascinating position. Let's go ahead and look at g4, because that was the only kind of thing I came up with that was sensible. I really wasn't thinking about e4 here, but let's give it a shot. So e4, let's just see what its idea is. Knight e1, and then it's just going to say the rook is terrible. Huh. All right, I'm just gonna make some obvious moves. Let's say rook h3, and then it just wants to play d5 like a monster. Well, it's funny, Josh. I didn't miss knight f6 after you told me about this idea. The next day, I went to my notebook, and I've got it in there, and I was just like, no, I'm not convinced that this is compensation. And even here the computer's not like saying black's winning by force, but this is really actually insightful, right? Like, and this is the beauty of the computer. Sometimes the computer will actually say something totally interesting. I have to admit, if I'm just looking at it from a human point of view, like my human move would be like, I'm worried about like the bishop recycling. Let's say here, and the bishop recycling, and it's just like, no, dude, you're toast. Yeah, it's saying I'm just done, and it's because the black-white pieces have no squares. I'm gonna play rook 88 soon. All right, very fascinating. Okay, this is actually one of the okay. So I got this wrong, and I spent a long time on this. I got this one wrong, and also I got it wrong, like, in the analysis. I spent, I don't know, an hour or something trying to make this work, and I was pretty certain that when I came to the live reveal today, that the computer was going to be like, no, knight takes e4, it's not going to work. So, and I'd even seen this knight f6 idea. And let me just go through this one more time. So, like, that was the move that scared me, knight e2. Because if he plays knight a2, the knight is just, off on the side of nowhere. And I want to stress, like, it's saying not only is knight f6 great, but also f5, which I also looked at, and I was just like, you're weakening yourself too much, bro. But it likes all these moves. Okay, beautiful. Josh is saying, in the Briar, you sack for those center pawns often, and sometimes in worse situation than this. So it isn't as big a surprise for me. Right. Um, right, I have to let the computer think. And I'm. By the way, like I want to stress, Josh. I don't know if you got the beginning of the show, but Danny Wrench has this new video about, how to use the computer, and it's like now it's saying 92 is excellent, but okay, I think it is the best move. Any case, so normally the chess.com computer, when you just run it, is terrible, but I think there's a new way of using it, and that's what I'm kind of experimenting with today. Okay, so let's go on with the game. It didn't despise what I did, which was a5. And the point is not that necessarily to say, oh, 94 was just as good as a5. No, it was like a big deal that I missed the idea. And a thing I really want to stress is the drawback of me playing an opening I didn't like, even though I got, a great position out of the opening, is that I wasn't familiar with it. And that cost me not only some key ideas, but also on the clock. Like these several moves here, I'm down to 54 minutes in this, like, game in 100 situation. It's a disaster. Okay, so here we go. 92 was expected, and here, for a while, I was thinking that g6 and bishop c8 were about as good as one another, but what ended up happening is Josh convinced me that bishop c8 was much better, and the computer is also into it too, which is pretty cool. And the basic idea that I didn't appreciate is because I didn't appreciate that the bishop on c3 is a victim, I shouldn't allow him to tickle the b pawn to go back to b2, because the bishop on c3 is an absolutely miserable piece. So, for example, bishop c8, bishop f1, and then bishop d7, and I'm just holding the line, and soon I'm going to start King's Indian style stuff on the king side with h5 and the rest. Now, we're going to talk about my fears here, that Josh also was like, dude, you don't have to worry about f4, but definitely in the game I was obsessed. So let's look at f4. Now it's saying c4 and stuff, which is probably fine, and b4. Let me just see what I was thinking. Knight ft, ed, knight d5. Let's say bishop b2, ef. Right, and I thought at least this was a little bit better for me. The computer's, of course, just like, dude, you're totally crushing it here. So the reason that variation was important for me, and also to check it with the computer, is that I was afraid of f4, and it's later my fear of f4 in a different position that's really, I'm going to cause my second most terrible mistake. The first, of course, being c5. Like this difference between bishop c8 and g6, it's a mistake, but it's not the one that I'm really angry with myself about. Okay, so here we go. G6. It says it's good. It says it's good. It doesn't like it much. Okay. Bishop f1. Interestingly, it wants queen d7. So b4, bishop b2, and now I play bishop c8, which I was mostly happy with. And I felt my opponent's next move was a mistake. And this is an interesting question about how to evaluate the position. It is not saying what I thought, though. So I thought that white would be better with... By the way, let me just say some basics. White's advantage, not that white's that much better or anything, but white's advantage is that he has more space. And so he shouldn't be trading pieces. And I think a key way in which GMs can beat FMs is the FMs really violate this. They don't understand that. And honestly, it's even hard for me to do it too, because playing with the space advantage takes a lot of skill. But anyways, my opponent played knight c4 here, and that's going to fix my bad knight on b6. And it's going to just alleviate a lot of the commotion in the back ranks that I have because I have less space. I felt here that white should play c4, maybe bishop b5. The computer wants a4 that I have to admit, to my human eye, that doesn't look right. Because I feel like a4, I can just do like h5 or bishop g7 and start the party over there. Yeah, let me just see my move. I thought c4 was what was called for. And okay, it does say that white has a small edge. Josh and I argued about this a little bit, and I wasn't sure, by the way, what black should do, if he should play bc or what. I assumed bc, but I didn't really know. Yeah, and I felt like this would be the right move, because if I don't play bc, then the guy can start doing knight d3 and squeeze me with space. And this points to really the inaccuracy earlier of playing g6 instead of bishop c8. Interesting. Josh is saying that Stockfish can't do closed positions and Leela's better. This was told to me by a very reliable source. Okay. I am not an expert with the engine, and honestly, I don't like it too much, but I think it is important, at least when I do an analysis, to force myself to do it. And already, it's said some interesting things. All right, so here we go. We're going to see. My impression is that knight c4 was very... Was it question mark exclam? Right. And it wants bishop h6, which is... I didn't like it. Well, actually, maybe it's good to talk about. I didn't like it because I was worried I was setting myself up for an f4. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm totally happy with the move I did. Bishop g7. And that knight takes, queen takes, bishop c4. Here I make the second move in the game where I was really just upset with myself. Bishop c4 doesn't make a lot of sense. The bishop's not that strong there, but I'm going to explain my own mistake, not as a way to exculpate myself, but just to force myself to articulate. Again, the bishop on c8 is a classic King's Indian bishop, and it's beautiful. Me playing bishop a6 is one of the most terrible positional mistakes I can remember making. I did it, though, because I was terrified of some kind of f4 and e5. In hindsight, an irrational fear, but that was what drove me to play the way I did. Now, interestingly, here's where the computer and I, and Josh too, probably differ. Josh and I felt, I did this game in the previous episode where I had analyzed this thing. I said, Josh, what's your first instinct? And dude said something like h5. And I feel like, right, that's what should be done. The computer doesn't like it, and I like it a lot. I like it a lot. Let's see if it changes its mind a little bit. Knight d3 makes sense to me. And I wanted to just play h4. And we're going to give it a little bit of time. My sense was that black was a touch better here. I could be wrong. It's liking bishop c1. I'm going to let it think for a little bit. And, yeah. Confival says everything is equal. Well, let's just say there's some weird things about the white position. It's not clear what's going on with the bishop on c4. The bishop on c1 needs to be improved, and it does make sense to me that something like bishop c1 should be played. And maybe h4 is too fast. I can always play something like bishop d7 first. It's saying like bishop c1, bishop d7, knight b2. I have to admit that's a little out there for me, but it's a thought. Actually, but it does point to a key problem that white has, and we see this in the game too, is that the knight wants to be on c4. It's not the bishop. Okay, I'm going to let it think for a little bit, just because I want to see what the official analysis is. And I think with this chess.com business, it needs It needs a little time. So it said bishop d7 was a little bit better. And in that line, it wants me to push for some kind of f5. Interesting. Okay. And that points a lot to my insecurities in the position, too, because I felt like f5 would always be really dangerous due to f4 and that bishop on c4 looking at my king. All right, so that's kind of interesting as well. And let me just say the motivations of h4, a lot of it is so that at some point I can play hg and then stick a knight on g4 where it then can't be messed with anymore. But and what I mean by that is like the f4s of the world will never be strong again because of knight g4, but maybe I shouldn't be so worried about f4 anyway. That was clearly part of the mania that led me to make my following mistake. Okay, so bishop a6, terrible, and I'm arguably on tilt here. Bishop takes, and I thought, in my analysis, I thought rook takes would have been stronger. It says queen takes is fine. Okay. A takes, c takes, knight d3, queen b5 looks fine, and now bishop c1 was a good move. And let's say this is the next phase of my questions here. Okay, I'm really low on time, and I played rook e8. The computer is okay with it, and it does immediately say what I thought, but the evaluations, that's changing it up a little bit. So I felt white made a big mistake here, and in the game, because I had a sense of guilt, I felt like maybe I was worse, and the computer's saying it's just totally equal. And in particular, I felt that white should play knight b2, and I felt that it would be that white would be better after knight b2. Interesting. Actually, you know what I can do is if I scroll this up there, then you guys can see too what's going on here with the business. So. You can see with the 32 there, I'm down, 20 minutes on the clock. And I really felt that after knight b2, I was going to be worse. Okay, and it just wants me to play knight d7 and f5. And we're going to see actually something very similar I could have done with a much improved position here. So rook a4. It says it's good. I really despise this move. And in fact, it wants it to go back to a2, so clearly it couldn't have been that good. Okay. So, rook a4, knight d7. Now, bishop e3 is at least consonant with what the guy wants to do. And here I'm going to let the computer think a little bit. At least its first intuition is that it wants the move that in the post I liked, f5. And very interesting that I missed it, and I want to explain a little bit about it while it's thinking. I didn't play f5, mostly because I felt my rooks are not placed to play f5, and that since my pieces are funny, or at least they felt funny, I shouldn't be playing with any grand ambition on the king side, opening up my king. The point, however, is, though, that on f5, white pretty much needs to play f3. And once you realize that, you say to yourself, well, with f3, he's not coming in with the queen or doing anything fancy like that. Okay. Good question, Infernal Crush. The problem with the knight d5s and knight e4s of the world were before that the knight could go back to b2 while the bishop's still on c1. Though I think that fear of the bishop opening up is what drove my opponent to make the move rook a4. Okay, I now make a mistake that again is driven by a sense of shame or guilt, and I should be playing f5. Let's assume f3 is forced. And I really like the move rook c3 here. The comp likes knight f6. I like rook c3 just because it's preventing knight b2, because on knight b2 I have rook takes e3. Now it's liking bishop f6. Maybe I'll let it think for a moment here. And so just to put a fine point on it, I played bishop f6 without f5, also rerouting the bishop. And this is just a much better version of that because now the king will be open. It's seeing rook c3 too, by the way, so that's kind of interesting. You know, it used to be doing this thing where it was like, I'm thinking. Let's see here. You got my depth and all this stuff going on. Analysis, 1 minute. Okay, I think that's all correct. Okay, so bishop f6, good. Rook c3, it says it's about equal. All right, I'm mostly okay with that. Now, let's go to the big question here. Bishop f6. And he actually likes queen a1. It's funny, I had looked at variations of queen f1 along with f5, f3, but in this position I didn't really look at it. And that's a true computer move, queen a1 here. Let's put that on the board. Because, well, so anti-intuitive to drop the pawn on c2, but, and I did see this in a different variation, that on rook c2, the point is rook c2, knight b4, and the knight's going to land on c6, after which it's a gentleman's agreement between me and Josh Friedel that if a knight lands on c6, you kind of have to stop the analysis. You know, back in the day, we'd analyze me and Josh, and he would never want to give up, so we had to establish some parameters of when the dude had to give up, and that was the only clear one we ever came up with, that the dude had to give up when I got a knight on c6. So, queen a1 definitely looks strong. He goes knight b2. And now I did bishop d8. Queen e2, queen e2. I'm skipping over some questions because I want to let the computer think for a while here. After the move I make, after which I'm down to like 16 minutes here, and I'm going to move the bar up so you can see what I'm talking about here. I am going to be, well, it's going to go to this endgame that's very forcing. It's hilarious, I think, that the computer thinks I'm a little bit better here, and it's saying weird moves, so I'm going to give it a time to think about it. I did think bishop b6 was a very interesting move. Yeah, so I'm gonna get into that. But I'm gonna let it think. King g7 in this position though doesn't make any sense to me, and h5 makes beyond no sense to me. I just want to be clear with these engine moves don't make any sense to me. Yeah, queen e1 is nasty. I wanted the winning side every time. Well, Josh, we just had to set some rules, bro, because you never want to give it up. You know, you have to give up the dream sometimes. These computer moves with King G7, H5, I just want to stress, I don't get it at all. So I spent a lot of time here. If you want, you can see me suffer in these positions in, I think it's episode 2 of this series. The last 2 videos are dealing with this game, and this is the 3rd, the computer live reveal. And I played this move knight b6, which it's not happy with, but at least it's not in its top 3. And I don't understand King g7. But let me just say, the interesting thing that I needed to see, and this is now in a little bit of time pressure, is that obviously the knight's coming to c4. But if it comes to c4, it's not a question of like if I'm going to take it. I felt. We'll see what the computer says. But it's just like when I'm going to take that thing. Because that is his only good piece. So let's get into bishop b6. And I'll move this up here so people can see. I felt that knight c4 was like pretty well forced, and I was going to play bishop takes e3. Okay. Now, one great piece of news is if pawn takes e3, then let's see if the computer agrees, then rook c4 is really nasty. Yeah, and I looked at this variation. Well, you can go to a1 too. Really nice exchange sacrifice. I did not have myself up by like 1.2. That was too strong. In fact, it likes a4 instead of knight e4, and I did actually think about that as well. But anyways, I just knew that this was a nice position for black. That was the only thing I knew. So instead of that, there was rook takes e3, and now the problem is, of course, that the knight has, will drop c2 if it moves. Oh, and look at this. This move I did miss in my analysis. Just the very simple king f8. That's pretty cold-blooded. Right, and I'm just going to say that your knight isn't going to be that amazing. And I'm just going to play king f8, e7. This stuff where it's saying king g7 is an alternative, I don't understand king g7 at all. Yeah, I don't really understand king g7. So this is interesting. Let me go back though one move. I was thinking about like rook a6 and stuff here. It doesn't care. It really doesn't care about anything else. Yeah, king f8 makes a lot of sense. What is this thing doing? It's like king g7, rook e1, rook c4. It's beyond me. The other variation I really looked at here, of course, was rook c4, knight b6, and I couldn't really get that to work. Let me look at that briefly. Let's say rook a1, knight c4, and rook b3. So the point is knight d2, rook takes b4, and it just wants to play here. And maybe I didn't appreciate how strong that was going to be. That is very interesting, actually, isn't it? Yeah. So here's the thing about knight b6. Knight b6 doesn't lose the game. I don't think. We'll see what the computer says. But it leads to a position where my own winning chances, I think, really decline dramatically. As in, the position's probably still equal, but it's going to be a lot harder for me to get the kind of game that I want. Bishop b6, on the other hand, well, then we're playing with the full deck. Then we're playing with everything still on the table for black. And I think king f8 would also be a fine move for black as well. And again, this computer saying king g7 is, that's beyond me. I don't get it. Okay. Right. All right, let's do it. Knight b6. Now, I gave it a question mark, exclamation question. It's changing it back to its other bad thing. It likes the position a lot, but it's not saying the exchange sacrifice. So I felt, when I played knight b6, I felt the following variation was pretty much forced. It's giving the variation. It's just saying it's better for white. c3, I'm going to say it looks right. Snip, cb, ab. All right, so here's the interesting question. When I played knight b6, this was the position I had in my mind. And I wasn't certain. I felt like I had enough compensation for the pawn. But again, it wasn't the position I wanted, because I think white truly has to make a terrible move to lose the game now. And of course, I'm pushing the envelope myself. Okay, the first piece of interesting news is that it definitely likes the move that I thought was best for black. So let's get into it. Rook a8, king g7, rook b8, and I thought bishop c5 was better here. Okay, so at least, and I thought white had two choices here. King g2 or rook b7. So let me just check my assumptions. On king g2, I was thinking that after f5, I would have enough play. Oh yeah, it's with me. It's with me. And again, I looked at this variation with f5, f4. Okay. And I realized it was very spicy, but that yeah, it was at least I'm still in the range. And honestly, if I could get this position, this would be a fun position to play. I don't know, in a practical game when time pressure, anything could still happen. So anyways, I thought this move was best, rook b7. And then it likes h5. My cool idea, let's see if it likes it. I want a g5, and let's say king g2, and then I wanted rook c3, with the idea that now if f4, I can always just take it and I'll be threatening f3. Plus, if I need to play rook a3 to block off the file, I'll be fine. Right, and it's saying g4, which I did spend some time with, but the thing about g4 is then, it's so hard for white to do anything later after g4. I think even like g4, rook a3, what is white going to do after that? Okay, so I think this is all reasonable analysis on my part. And white got frisky with king g2, and then I got frisky with bishop d4. Computer likes what I thought, king g7. And interesting, it's funny when you see the computer. One reason I don't like to do it with the computer is once you see the analysis that it does, your mind is like permanently influenced. Like, for example, what I mean is when I'm looking at this thing, there's all kinds of things that are possible for me to imagine about the evaluation of the position. Like, for example, am I a little worse? Who's better and why? Definitely felt that I had good practical compensation. So king g7, it's saying it's like basically totally equal. I don't know, and a lot of times, the old prejudice against the computer was it doesn't understand the endgames, and that might also be true here. Any case, I played a mistake, what I felt was a mistake. Bishop d4. It still kind of sort of likes it. And the reason I didn't like this move is that it allows white to go back and do the rook a8, b8 thing. And I thought that that was reasonable for him. All right, let's look at the way it goes down. f4, doesn't like it. King g7, takes, and now rook a7, b3. Okay, the computer's, at least the computer's first intuition is the same. Rook f2. Okay, now let's go ahead and put the next two moves on the board. Here's a position I spent a lot of time on. If you recall, if you were watching a past episode, I talked a lot about rook e4 versus b2. And the drama about b2 is I had to worry about e5. So we're going to check that. I have some interesting notions about what's going on there. And then also the move played, rook e4, just how we feel about it. Interestingly, the computer's giving my variation. Take that, Friedel. Take that. Well, I'm saying take that because it seems absolutely insane, and I'm amazed that this is right. I thought for sure there's some way I was going to be wrong. So, b2, e5. Now, the point is, if you play de, I'm going to guess that rook b2, I said at least, yeah, it's saying clear advantage. I thought at least a little bit better for white because now a rook will be coming behind the pass pawn. So if black is going to play b2, he needs to get ready to play bishop e5, rook ff7, king h6. Now the beauty of this is, especially with the computer's affirmation, it's calling it zeros, but this is a thing where, people, both sides could, we're still in an interesting game. Now let's just say this looks insane, right? This looks insane. To put the king out here and allow both, you have to think about rook h7 and you have to think about h4. Both look pretty insane. So the point is I'm threatening rook c1, though. And if you play h4, you got to worry about my own king coming h5, g4. And if you take, the amazing thing is, like, it's kind of hard for you to stop rook c1, and the king is now a very powerful piece with, like, king f5, e4, and a lot of variations. Okay, so the computer is affirming my madness here. The key variation was h4. It's saying both g5 and h5. I like king h5 as a human, of course, because I want to be active. King h3, h6, and then Josh and I had the same thought on the show at the same time last week, where we were both like, wait, rook f4, and that's actually the engine's first move. Rook takes, pawn takes, and it wants all kinds of things. I just assume bishop f4 is a complete draw. Yeah, with g5 next. Okay, fascinating. So okay, really interesting. And the great thing about this, too, what this is showing, is a little bit my intuition, is even though I went down this road where, like I said, I felt like I didn't get the kind of game I wanted, even here there was full opportunity for me to still win the game. All right, so I played this move. And for my human, this is, by the way, this is not a move that I regret. I think to play b2 and see e5. If you don't see e5, then you just play b2. But if you see e5, you got to say to yourself, oh, this is the safe way to go. Okay, rook b3, and now I blundered. This was like the full blunder, and I think the kind of curious thing about this is, like, even though this is the move that's going to change the evaluation the most, it's not the one I feel the most regret for. And that, like, you're playing some long game, you're going to do something dumb at some point. And I see it with other, players much stronger than myself as well. So, I don't know if what I'm trying to say is that's not, this next move, although it's terrible, is not the one I'm truly beating myself up over. Rook e7, and so what I wrote was equals, but white is having the fun. And it's basically, it's very hard for black. It's very hard for white. And one basic thing about this opening is just that the bishop really does control just as many squares as a rook. It's just that it doesn't have the option of covering both. So as long as I keep my rook on the board, I'm going to have, I think, full compensation in this position. That's basically what the machine's saying. It likes g4. The problem with g4 is then I'm going to get in with the dark squares later with my bishop, and my rook will swing around. So I'll always have enough play, I felt. I thought rook d2, I spent a lot of time trying to make it work, but just the coordination of the rook and the bishop made it too hard. All right, let's conclude the show with seeing how bad my move was. Bishop d4. And me and Josh had a little bit of a disagreement. It's finally giving a question mark. The question was, is rook b4 better than rook f4? Interestingly, the machine isn't saying winning, that either one is winning yet. I felt both rook b4 and rook f4 are winning. I liked rook b4 better just because I have to take on f2 anyway. There's no f5 doesn't help. And then white keeps his pawns more stable and uncommitted, on h2 and g3. But okay, I'm not going to spend time on it because rook f4 looked also winning. What I was missing here is its own psychological investigation. Like, did I think I had rook e2? All kinds of weird questions. Also on rook b4, what was I missing? It's like, it's a really hard problem. And of course, like, these are the kind of mistakes that plague everybody. And it doesn't matter how deep your positional understanding is if you're going to make mistakes like this. But everyone is going to. It's part of the game. So here we go. Rook f4, gf. I played king f6, rook b7, h6, and now I felt here the guy gave me a little bit of play. He plays bishop king f3, and now maybe actually the computer will teach me something here, because both in my analysis and during the game, I felt g5 was a good move just to trade the pawn off. The computer's saying, no, bro, this is where you should sit. And the challenge with sitting is that the black king isn't really going anywhere, and then at some point the white king can swerve around to c6, sack the exchange, and then win the game. Which is also the big threat, even with g5. And maybe the simple way of putting it is, well, now the the white king will have more trouble rolling because there's always some kind of bishop e3. Like, let's say the king gets to b5 and then you play bishop e3. Still looks dodgy because the rook's going to be on d7. Okay, well, it definitely thinks my next move was a mistake. I could have been a contender. Okay. Here we go. g5. Now it's saying it's best. That doesn't make any sense to me. I didn't like it before. h3. gf. I felt I was real close to drawing here. And at some point, to my shame, I offered to draw. King g6. Doesn't like it, but rook e7. I don't think it changes much. I had a long variation. You can check it out in the last episode where I was saying king f6 also lost because the white king comes around. My next move, though, definitely, I guess the computer's going to say it was also terrible. It at the very least makes my opponent's task much easier. And so, well, actually, let's roll through my variation, see what the computer says to it. King f6. Right, as long as the computer doesn't say I do anything totally weird here. It wants h5, maybe. Let me just go through this one. Bishop h2. Now it wants rook h8. Okay, rook g8, it likes to. That was my move. Yeah, okay, so this, I guess it's kind of, I had this whole plan that I really liked. And then h4. Yeah, and now I'm getting rolled, and now the king can go back. Right. Okay. This is lost. Like I said, if you want to look at it, there's a whole other thing. But the question I'm interested in is king f6, rook e8, and then it wants this move, h5. Presumably with the understanding that if I get to h4, he will bishop g3 me. Okay, maybe. Like, let me just see what its idea is. So if I go rook g8, it wants h4. And maybe here's a simple way of putting it, is that the deal isn't so much that you get the pawn on h6 versus h4, it's that you're preventing the pawn on h3 from gaining space by going to h5. The challenge with sitting is not having to sit. That's right. Okay. So, all right, I'll show you my terrible move. We'll do a couple more. And it's terrible because I'm giving the rook like entrance. And as I discussed last time, it's like Nimzovich talking about the giving the rook scope, what he calls the rook, the absolute seventh. Say a rook on the seventh. In this case, it's going to be the absolute sixth. Yeah, but I'm crispy critters here, man. By the way, I thought rook g8 was much stronger here than what he did. Yeah, he played rook g5, and it's saying rook g1, rook g8. Same thing, really. You're just waiting because I'm in zugzwang. I don't have any great moves. So rook g5 gave me, you know, I'm still lost. But, yeah, I'm still lost. Okay, I'm going to end it there. And in conclusion, well, the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to raid somebody else. But before that, I'm going to say that the challenge I have now is to come up with a training program that doesn't necessarily involve my own games. And there's a lot of books that I want to read. And so I think that will be coming up in the coming weeks. I will do a video or two about this on our ChessDojo video channel if you want to check that out. All right. And so, Josh, thank you very much. Let's see if I remember how to raid somebody. I think I go like this. Raid. And let's give it to Moronius. Mr. Moronius Vulgaris. Here we go.